Good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be looking at some of the upcoming trends that the heating sector is experiencing, and specifically today we're going to be discussing online platforms that are selling heating systems. So the equipment, a boiler and a heat pump, but also the installation and the fitting of the equipment. So a reminder just that everyone is on mute just to avoid background noise, but we've got a chat box on the right hand side on the functionality that you can see in the GoTo software meeting. So do ask questions and join in our discussion in the second part of this session. We'll also be recording, so we'll be uploading this and be more than happy to share that with everyone. So let's get going and introduce ourselves. So we've got quite a team of experts from Delta here today, from 3 of the research services that we work on. This is Jenny talking, and I work on our new energy business model service. So having a look at different propositions, innovations that are coming into the energy space. I'll let Stephen and Felicity introduce themselves.
Yes, hello everybody. This is Stephen Ashurst. I currently manage our Heat Insight service, which looks at the residential heat and wider energy market from a specifically UK perspective.
And my name is Felicity Tully. I manage our electrification of heat service, which looks at the heat pump and other electric heating markets and the way they interact with the electricity system across Europe.
Fantastic. So that should have got you used to our voices. You'll see just a quick box at the bottom which indicates as well this webinar isn't just a one-off. We do them throughout the year. Our most recent one was on electric vehicles. And our next one coming up is a really interesting one looking at smart meter data and essentially how to make money from that. So feel free to have a browse of other topics that we talk about. But if we get onto the agenda for today's webinar, that's set out in front of us here. We'll give you a very quick introduction to Delta, just for those of you who don't know us, but most of you who've joined I think do, so we'll keep that very brief. And then we'll go into the meat of the session, which we've kind of orientated into 2 sections. For the first, we'll talk for 20-30 minutes around these 2 bullet points, the second and the third. So the state of the market and what companies are developing these different propositions. How is this online sales route to market sort of disrupting the traditional value chain? And then we'll look specifically at consumers and end users and a case study of the British market. Then in the second half, we'll have an industry facilitated kind of Q&A discussion, because we realise that there's lots of people from lots of different backgrounds on the webinar today. And as this topic is really one of the hot topics that lots of people are talking about, it'll be really good to get share some opinions and thoughts and some insight. So I'll let Stephen now explain how to do that.
Sure. So yeah, a fairly simple interface for everybody. So yeah, throughout the webinar, we'd be interested in your questions as and when they arise, and we'll periodically stop to answer them, or perhaps if there's a lot, we'll save them towards the portion at the end. So all you have to do is literally type your question into the question box there, hit send, and we'll be monitoring those throughout. As Jenny mentioned, it's a really kind of prominent, interesting, potentially highly disruptive topic we're covering today, and we'd really like to not just have some questions, but hear the opinions of the range of stakeholders we have on the webinar today. So you can also come in to make a statement or a question or raise a point. To do that, you just have to let me know by raising your hand. So this is a screenshot of my console, but on your one there should be a little option to raise your hand. It's either on this bar, this grey bar, or should be next to your name. And when you do that, I'll be able to see that you want to come into the discussion and unmute you, and then I'll let you know, and you can have your say. So yeah, we're really looking forward to hearing your opinions throughout, but certainly in the second half of the webinar.
And if for some reason, so we've got quite a small little box there where we only can see 5 people at a time. So if we do miss the raising a hand, do feel free to mention it in the question box. Make sure that we're aware of that fact, just as we kind of orientate ourselves around the software as well.
Completely. And just one final point on the questions, just to help us manage them. Say, for example, you've got a question about a specific market. start your question in bold, Germany, and then type your question equally if it's about customers, write customers in big capital letters, and then your question. And it'll just help us filter through them a bit more efficiently as we go through them.
Perfect. So just for a quick intro for those of you who don't know Delta, we're based up in Edinburgh. We've got colleagues across Europe, but actually Felicity, Stephen and I are all in our Edinburgh office today. And we're essentially a research consultancy who help those that we work with understand this transition that the energy system is going through from old energy to new energy. And it's fantastic that this term new energy is becoming less elusive, kind of more intuitive. People know what we're talking about when we describe this. But you can see on the right of the screen here in yellow, that's the terminology that we use to really identify and drill down into what do we mean by this changing landscape. And I think this webinar today will be focusing a lot on this service-orientated piece. So looking at how these online platforms are developing a relationship with energy consumers and customers beyond just commodity sales. And so seeking out that kind of deeper relationship. A couple of other points actually that we could put on this grey to yellow transition in relation to what we're talking about today would be analog to digital, and another one maybe standalone to connected. So really describing this move of the energy space. So that's where we work and that's where we come from. Let's get going with the actual topic of the webinar now, and I'll hand over to Felicity to start off describing that and what we see.
Sure. So when talking about a disruptive route to the market, it's helpful to look at the ways, first of all, the traditional value chains and then how those might be being disrupted. So I'm going to take you through very quickly a massive oversimplification of the routes to market for heating that we see in Europe. I have a diagram of routes to market which covers a whole page and has a lot of different arrows on it, and this is a massive oversimplification of that one. But for example, we can start with 3-tier, as is shown on the screen at the moment, going from manufacturer to what we call a B2B, a business-to-business company, such as a wholesaler, retailer, working in that space between the manufacturer and the installer. Then moving down to the installer, and then moving down to ownership by the end user. We also have 2-tier systems where there's direct engagement with installers from the manufacturer. This is a helpful approach, especially with systems which installers are less used to, such as heat pumps, where they need a little bit more support from the manufacturer to ensure that the installation is done in the most efficient way and correctly, of course. Another 2-tier way that we see is through a third party via, for example, an energy company with engagement directly with the manufacturer and then directly to the end user, or through, for example, a housing developer where the manufacturer will sell in bulk to a housing developer. So there's the 3 main ways that we see. One thing that's important to raise is that in some of these approaches that don't involve the installer working directly with the end user, there'd be some kind of subcontracting relationship there where the installer never has ownership of the heating system, but simply is paid for labour and time. So when we look at online heating sales, there's a few different ways these can stand out, but one way is directly from the manufacturer to the end user, again with some kind of subcontracting relationship there with the installer. Jenny will go into this in a little bit more detail in a moment. Or the online sales platform can be that third party, perhaps with a relationship with a wholesaler for supply of the heating systems, perhaps the direct relationship with the manufacturer. And the thing that I wanted to highlight here is that this kind of approach can bypass this B2B section. So we're going to talk later perhaps about ways in which certain players might have to adapt within this value chain. But what's important is that this approach really aims to empower the customer to make that decision themselves, rely less on recommendations, and have more of an overview and purchasing power directly. But at the same time, this reduces the influencing power of the installer as a direct sales approach to the end user, again, with them as more of a subcontracting role going forward. But we'll explore this in more detail as we go through the webinar. I'm going to hand over to Jenny now for a bit more detail.
Thanks, Lucy. So now we have an idea of the traditional way in which the market structure has worked, and then the impact that online sales can make to this. So let's have a look at clarifying the level of sophistication that we can see within these platforms, and there is a range with regard to the propositions that are out there. So the most simplistic way in which a consumer can interact with this type of proposition is simply just to excuse me, buy the equipment or the appliance online, so be it the boiler, the heat pump, electric water heater, and then they are left to find and coordinate the installation piece themselves. So they have to do this research piece, and essentially that's describing an e-commerce situation where it's just purely based on the product. Moving up into the next level of sophistication is where the service, there's an additional service provided, additional information provided to the consumer in the form of a recommendation on who could complete this installation piece. So there's a referral made to an organisation or perhaps a list of different options, but it's carried out by a separate party to the product piece. So it's starting to move towards a more coordinated piece, but it's essentially kind of a lead generation proposition. And then the most sophisticated piece is where this is really incorporated together and then combined into a single package, where you have the product purchase and the installation integrated together. And here it's one provider that interacts with the consumer, and they visit an online platform and they're able to procure this heating system installation piece in full from there. So, the slides are a little bit behind. So now let's move on to having a look at the fact that we're going to be focusing on these two more sophisticated propositions as they're more interesting. And Stephen will give us a quick insight into, actually no, sorry, that's the next slide. Right, we're going to have a quick look at different players who are active in the market, and then we'll have a look at specific propositions that are actually being delivered to end consumers. So if we have a look at, we've got 4 different main key types of players here: electricity suppliers, heating product manufacturers, retailers, and new entrants. And what I'll do with this slide is just discuss some of the examples that we're seeing in the market today across Europe in these different categories. So as I said, focusing on the 2 more sophisticated propositions. In the energy supplier space, there's more and more players who are exploring and developing a variety of different approaches. So there's a number, for example, who are working with those who already have established install capabilities, so the workforce, the boots on the ground, for example, HomeServe or Proxy Serve in France, and they're coordinating and working together to reach the customer base and provide these different elements of the service. Moving on to the kind of integrated whole package piece, there are some of the logos of companies that are active in this space. So, for example, Essent is a big Dutch energy company, and they recently bought CV Total, which is an online sales platform for boilers. Or E.ON is another example, one of the key investors in Thermondo, and also using that platform as a plugin on their site. Another one, NG in France, NG Home Services, a very strong player in the repair and maintenance market with a very large network of technicians. And I think this home services piece is an interesting piece that perhaps we could take on and talk about in the discussion in the second half of this. But so they also have an online portal direct to customers to replace their heating system. Moving on to product manufacturers. So in taking the German market, for example, the three dominant players here have all introduced lead generation services as this pardon me, as this first step into developing a more integrated value chain and extending that relationship with end consumers. But it's important here to note, as Felicity mentioned, the importance of installers, and particularly in the German market, the dynamics there. And so the product manufacturers really looking at the installer as their customer at the moment anyway, and providing this digital end consumer acquisition as a service for installers. So the contractual agreement still lying at the moment with installers. Retailers, and some examples here. So we've got really generalists who are already selling a huge range of products online and starting to look at heating and how they could sort of expand their portfolio of activity into covering that sector. Or specialist retailers who are online and they're focusing already on heating. And the number of these are growing across Europe. And so they're combining, as we've defined, this product and this install piece together. Perhaps not in the most streamlined way at the moment, some of them, so maybe requiring a call to confirm the quote, but they are developing interesting capabilities. And then finally, new entrants, and a number of high-profile entrants, new entrants, kind of startups going into this most sort of starting point as the most sophisticated proposition piece. So here are some logos of companies who are doing this, and essentially seeking to provide this one-stop shop, whole package piece, and creating a brand in this heating install space. So that's an overview of lots of different players across the space who are active in different ways. So now I will pass over to Stephen to have a look at some of the specific offerings that we're seeing.
Before we move on, Jenny, I've had a question asking what this arrow means on the slide from Heights Online downwards.
Okay. So this is indicating the initial intent or kind of ambition from some of the heating manufacturers to move into this piece where they own the relationship with the end consumer and they're providing both the equipment and the installation piece. But experience with the installers themselves having a bit sort of showing reluctance to potentially engage in that way with these propositions. And so it's really indicating the learnings and experience that some of the heating manufacturers have had with regards to developing these propositions. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks both. And one thing that stands out as really interesting to me just on this chart is the number of retailers already involved here. Traditionally we've seen retailers be involved with fairly standard energy and gas offers, and maybe selling a little bit of solar PV. But these are big, trusted, prominent brands, and if they're getting on board with heating sales to the customers as well, I think that's just again could be one other element which helps really prompt uptake of these kind of platforms. So just to add a bit of geographical. Before we go into geographical, we've got some examples of these platforms. So just to bring them a little bit to life, if some of you online perhaps haven't replaced your boiler lately and haven't had to look at these. So this is one example of how a residential customer would go through the process. This is from Drapeau in France, and you can see here it's a fairly customer friendly graphical design. You can see they're offering a monthly payment option of €49. I'm sure that can perhaps increase or decrease a little bit depending on what you take from them. But their pitch, as you can see at the bottom half of the image, is your new boiler in 4 steps. So you estimate your monthly payments based on your current energy usage. You send some photographs of your existing system, which saves an on-site visit, which is something that many suppliers of this model look to look to do. They then make you an offer, you accept it, and then the work is scheduled without you having to leave your house, or without someone else having to leave their office to come out and see you. Another option, which is also important, this is Home Tree in the UK. So again, we're looking at the bottom of the graphic from left to right. So through their online portal, the customer can again put in information about their situation, and this can generate options for what boiler would be suited to their property. What Home Tree do differently though is they offer the option of some interaction with an expert installation or sales professional before any agreement is made or any system is bought, and then again installation and delivery is scheduled really simply.
But on that, it's important to note that it can be via a digital means. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the expert or the salesperson needs to visit the home. It could be through a call, or it could be through a chat video functionality.
You're right, exactly. And I think the predominant way Home Tree are approaching this is exactly that, through a video chat function. And we had a question about how much information the customers have to put in to, come to the point where they have enough information to get a quote and get a price. Well, this is the final example I'm going to show. This is Boxed, again a UK company, and this is actually the results for my house that I did the other day. So you can see in the bar along the top there, under the 9 recommendations, you can see 3 bed, 1 bath, and I think this was after 15 questions put in my postcode. I got 9 recommendations. So yeah, that's just to give a bit of life really to some of these the platforms that we're talking about, for those who weren't necessarily familiar with them prior to the webinar. And like I said, I also wanted to, there were loads of companies we saw on Jenny's previous slide there. I just want to add a bit of geographical context, because it is a rapidly emerging trend, something that over the last number of years it's come to our attention, and we've been looking into it more. So if you look at the chart on the right hand side, this isn't meant to be by any means comprehensive. It's just to give a feel for, like the heading says there, the key markets where we're seeing activity in this area, and to highlight some of the early front runners. So we just talked about Boxed and Drapo, and of course, I guess if you're aware of one company in this area, it'll be Thermondo in Germany. If we kind of translate that to just thinking about, how far could this model go? What is the size of the prize? Well, I'm sure many are familiar with these kind of stats here. On the left-hand side, the annual boiler market is about 5 million units just now, and in Western Europe, these kind of countries that we've got highlighted here, the majority are retrofit sales being installed to an existing heating system, which is important, of course, for specification. And in total, the entire European boiler market, including Eastern Europe, is about 8 million units a year.
And so that's even just highlighting the boiler install piece, where maybe in the discussion, if it's of interest to the people that we've got on the line, we can talk about moving into more of the home services, or this services piece. So exploring maintenance contracts, repair contracts, insurance pieces. So this way to seek understanding how can we add value to this first piece, and this is very much around boiler install, but how to develop on that.
Exactly. Yeah. And a couple of observations here before we move on that we've seen so far is that, well, as you can clearly see on the graphic, there's already established early movers in the key heating markets. One thing we've observed though is these early movers are native to that market, and we've not yet seen anyone expand into a neighbouring market. And clearly, what is also apparent is that yet no one has kind of branched east into again, it's the relatively considerably large Eastern European heating market as well.
As far as we know anyway, if you are aware of companies working in these areas, please let us know, because we don't claim that we've covered all of them, all of the companies in this sector.
Exactly, yeah, that's absolutely right. So yeah, we'd be interested. Like I said, this is something that we are putting more resource to, more effort to. It's clearly a really important trend that's emerging, but yeah, keen to know if anyone knows a little bit more. So to be honest, I think that about covers it for our state of the market overview portion of the webinar. We'd be quite keen now to do a poll or two to get some feedback from the audience here. The first one is a fairly simple one that I'll talk through and then just launch in a moment. So we're keen on your thoughts. So this is looking from the industry point of view. Put yourself in the shoes of suppliers, as you are anyway. So based on the emergence and success of this kind of change to the value chain, which main player stakeholder will have to adapt the most to maintain their market position? Mm-hmm. So do you think this will be largely impactful for heating manufacturers, for B2B companies such as wholesalers, is it installers, or will it be the energy providers themselves?
Thank you to those who've been sending answers in the questions. We're about to launch an online poll, which you can click your answers on the screen.
Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, hopefully you remember what you said. I will just, you should see the poll coming up on your screen now.
And then the reason we use this functionality, so using the poll instead of maybe the questions, is as people vote, then we'll be able to share, once that ends, an indication of the results. So we'll be able to bring that up on our screens and show the audience decision and what you think in an aggregated manner is the response to this question.
That's right, and we've got about over 2/3 of everyone who's voted now already, which is great. So we'll give you maybe 10 more seconds. If you're still making your mind up, we can see as the results are coming in. There's certainly one, maybe two clear options where the industry feels specific company types will be impacted most and will have to adapt most to maintain their market position. One or two less expected to be less affected. Okay, looks like the vote's still climbing up a little bit. 5 more seconds and then we'll close and we'll share the results with you.
This is something that we wanted to explore to understand how much of a threat perhaps this kind of approach is to certain players in the value chain. For example, I mentioned earlier about installers perhaps not having the sales requirements that they do currently. If this type of route to market becomes more prominent, so there's a few different ways that this could develop.
That's it, and well, let's close now. Really good engagement there, folks. Thanks for sharing your opinions. I should say it's confidential as well, so no one will know what your view is. But let's share and see what the results were. So hopefully everyone can see that. Just looking at a separate monitor so I can see as well.
Yeah, so as you said, Stephen, two main front runners there. So
that's right. Yeah. So the result did change from the early voting to once we had most of our attendees vote. So yeah, wholesalers and installers are viewed as those players, stakeholders, which will be most impacted. Will have to most significantly adapt their businesses to say cope in this new era
the
new market dynamic, exactly.
And I think that links well back to the chart that Felicity showed us at the beginning with regards to the different tiers and the structure of the traditional market and now the way in which we're moving forward.
And quite interesting that despite the fact that I guess heating manufacturers will be the ones to gain mostly from this development, the second least expected to be the second least impacted parties.
We had a question around what kind of actions that B2B companies or wholesalers could look at to try and, the question worded it, survive this this market trend. And I think that there's a lot of things that we're seeing happening already to adapt to changes in the market, generally such as B2B companies developing concept type solutions for installers, keeping their installers engaged, developing their own online platforms, a lot of manufacturers as well developing online comparison tools and things, which might not be a sales platform but allow that kind of online engagement with people.
That's right, and I guess some of the models we are familiar with still do go through wholesale, which to me initially was quite interesting. But yeah, clearly there is still a role for the wholesale players there. Perhaps, of course, that's based on storage. That's also probably to do with credit as well. But yeah, clearly based on our response here, people think that they will have to adapt most compared to other players. I think we have a second one. So this is putting yourself in the shoes of the customer now, looking from a customer perspective. What level of traction do you think these platforms will get with end users, residential customers, in the next few years? So are you a little bit skeptical? Do you think there'll be little change from today? I'll launch the poll actually, and I'll talk them through while I go. So that should be launched for you now. So yeah, do you think there'll be little change from today? So perhaps gain under 10% market share. So given that that's our first answer, you can understand that at this point in time we think they have got less than 10% market share. Do you think it will be limited but niche? So we'll certainly suit some customer types. Perhaps gain a few tens of percent in the market. A bit more optimistic. Do you think they will have quite a moderate to good impact? So it'll be fairly common, several tens of percents. Maybe it'll be out of your street. A few of your neighbours will have, next time they replace their boiler, they will go through via this route. Or do you actually think this is a big change, not quite, well, yes, on the horizon within the next few years? It will lead to a highly transformative impact, and more than every other installation will be via this route. So again, we've really high engagement with the voting. That's great. We've got over 80%. We'll leave it open a little bit more, and yeah, quite a spread, I suppose, in opinion here. We'll give you again just people who are still making up their mind a few more minutes. A few more seconds, sorry.
While we're waiting, I wanted to say that we've got a lot of questions in our list. Some of them I've not replied to because we will be answering them later in the session. Some of them, if we don't get to them in our discussion, we will come back to you and contact you directly with a response on that as well.
That's right. Okay, let's close there then and see what we think. Share that with everybody. And well, there we go. So that is setting quite a marker then, given that I did say that Delta, our current understanding is that while we have been impactful and we do see certainly growth and expansion, we captured less than 10% of the boiler market. The majority of you online think that customers will really get on board with this, and in the next few years, say by 2020 or thereabouts, we'll have captured more than, well, several tens percent of the market, which 30-40% is kind of what we were thinking when we gave that answer there. And 15% of you, 14% of you think it will be highly transformative. Maybe that's some of the companies we have on the webinar today. Be interested to hear your thoughts in the discussion session and why you think exactly this is resonating with customers. And on the flip side, the minority of our sample think that they will not have some significant impact, transformative impact on the heating sector. Good stuff.
It'll be really interesting to discuss some of the reasons behind that and some of the changes that we maybe need to see happen, or different market players, so maybe such as Amazon. Do we think really big names like that are going to get involved in this space and really kind of drive this forward? Or do we think that it'll be more from a customer pull point of view, and actually as more and more people hear about this, then that'll kind of catalyze the market? So yeah, really interesting.
So I think now we're going to, we have a case study based on some primary research Delta we've done with members of our customer panel. I'm going to hand over to Felicity to talk you through that. over to you, Flossie.
Thank you, Stephen. So in our Heat Insight service, every year we run a panel of UK homeowners, which has 1,000 people in it. We pick homeowners as they're the ones that are most likely to have more control over their heating compared to those in rental properties. And so I'm going to present some of the data from our last couple of years just now, looking at attitudes to the concept of buying heating online. And you can see here that in 2016, 2017, when we had 493 gas boiler customers within our 1,000 strong panel, 79% of them liked the concept of buying heating online. So that's a strong start. They like the idea, fairly conclusive level of interest at least. And when we start to break it down, we can see these are the things that they like the idea of. Firstly, they like the idea of having a bit more choice, relying perhaps less on a specific recommendation, reviewing the options themselves. They also like the idea of it saving time. They wouldn't need to perhaps call several people, have several physical visits in order to get quotes. And they also like the idea that they might be able to get savings, a certain offer online that they wouldn't be able to get in a face-to-face interaction. So these are the positives, the attractions. But what we see as the key concerns, what our customers reported as the key concerns are not being able to have that face-to-face interaction, not being able to build perhaps that level of trust, to have put a face to the name, to the work. And also, again, not trusting this online algorithm, this online system to provide them with the best fit solution. So the customers themselves know that their house is very individual. What they currently have in their heating system requires perhaps a bit of in-depth knowledge more than perhaps ticking a few boxes. So the concerns themselves are quite difficult to overcome. This is a difficult thing to sell, and we don't want to understate that in this webinar. We think that it's a very interesting business model and it's very good at raising awareness with customers, perhaps difficult to actually get them to buy online, hence the different types of levels of engagement that are needed. In order to explore this in a bit more detail, just before, right about Christmas time, we ran a focus group with some of our 2017-2018 panel, looking at a variety of things, but among that, showing them the Boxed and HomeServe websites. We gave them a bit of time to play around with them, and then we asked their thoughts on them. And as Stephen showed you the Boxed website earlier, HomeServe 1 is quite similar in terms of having a series of questions to pick from to sort of characterize your home. And you could see that people liked the idea of these websites, but again, the issue is around trust, that they get the right solution, that there's not so much of a personal touch. And just to go into a little bit more detail, here are some of the main likes and dislikes that we had in relation to these case studies. So our panel liked the presentation of the website. They liked seeing photos and description of the different options. They also liked an upfront explanation of the process, for example, saying, we're going to ask you these questions and then we will give you X, Y, and Z to choose from. And they liked systems where they could have a lot of choice to pick from. For example, the Boxed website gives you a list of options, whereas the HomeServe website tends to give you a particular bespoke best offer. And for those customers that we spoke to, they tended to prefer seeing lots of different options.
And we just had a quick question just to clarify that this is all talking about homeowners, and that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, homeowners, again, as those that are the most likely to have that purchasing power for the heating system and a bit more control. Dislikes that we saw was that for those customers who went into these websites theoretically looking for a gas boiler to replace an oil or an LPG system, they were a bit disappointed that they ticked that option and then were given a phone number to call, rather than having any more material or being able to be given a quote on that. We realise that that's a difficult thing to provide. Obviously, you need much more information about their off-grid system, but again, something that was flagged up as a dislike. And the main dislike that they really didn't like was having to give personal details to get a quote. They were concerned that they would get lots of spam, or that they didn't quite like that level of commitment before actual purchase or actual exchange of money. And having filled in some of these websites myself, I know that they can be quite tenacious in getting hold of you. So for those who weren't perhaps so interested in these, in going to purchase, it could be a bit frustrating. So I can understand those concerns there, but that was the key one. So overall, we can see from these websites that there's a lot of interest in these tools. There's something that people haven't really seen before, something people like to play around with. But at this particular stage, most of our panel felt that they would use it as a comparison tool, much like Compare the Market or something like that, rather than going straight to purchase at this particular stage. So again, to reiterate, it's a difficult business model to make viable.
Exactly, yeah, really good stuff. So yeah, like Felicity showed, 79% of our panelists liked the idea. And that's very close to the number of the general public who are comfortable buying anything online.
It's 88%.
That's right, 88%, so very close there. But the number of the sample who were really enthusiastic was less than 20%. So the majority of the sample we found have caveats, like Felicity just talked through there. So yeah, we think this is a great option for innovators, early adopters, but we think there's clearly some tweaks and learnings to be made on as these models develop to perhaps make them a bit more applicable to the mass market. And well, moving on, we have a final poll before we go into our discussion, and we've put yourself in industry shoes and customer shoes. Now we'd like just to get a feel for thinking about yourself and your own personal situation. Would you use these platforms to replace your heating yourself? So again, let me just get the poll ready in the background. Just a bit of fun, this one, really.
And as you can see, we've just listed the 4 different options. So yes, definitely totally up for using this kind of proposition and really engage with it.
That's right, no hesitation.
No hesitation. B, yes, potentially some hesitation, not sure, got some reservations, but they can be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Or C, unlikely to use it. There are some strong reservations there and maybe difficult or challenging to overcome them. Or definitely not, really just not interested in this kind of proposition.
That's right, exactly.
To clarify for those who were asking, we've got around 100 people on the webinar, so that's about 100 people taking part in these polls.
And again, most of those 100 people have cast a vote on this poll as well. Mm-hmm. We'll give you 10 more seconds, that'll be the full minute, and then we'll come back and
we do have a leading answer there, though, so if you do want to have a go at changing that, then vote now. We'll end it in, say, 5 seconds. Okay. Right, let's reveal the results of that, and you'll be able to see that there is a clear majority. So 58% of the participants that we've got today have voted yes, potentially. So very positive, really.
Lining up quite similarly to our customer panel results as well, in terms of the breakdown. So yeah, positive interest, but would have to, I presume, have that user experience yourselves to decide.
Mm-hmm. And actually going through, and one of the key interesting pieces that we've noted, again with the customer panel and the research that we've been doing, is that difference between using these sites for an information purpose and to educate yourself on the different options, different costs, different opportunities, but actually going through to make that purchasing decision, that's a much bigger step to take. Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. We've had a hand raised actually, so I'm going to hide this now, and let's move on to the discussion portion of the webinar. These are just some prompts in the background that we thought you could think about and come in. But Federico, I've seen your hand is raised. Let me just see if I can come to you to raise a point on this. Okay, I think your hand's gone down again, but If we covered your point, great. But if you'd still like to be the first to come in, please just click that button again. Raise your hand. Oh, here we go. Okay, so in a moment, Federico, we should be able to hear from you. Hi, Federico. You should be able to speak now. There's maybe a wee bit of background noise, but I think you'll be okay. Do you want to come in with your point?
No, just about the question that I put. All the panelists were homeowners or they were tenants as well.
Oh, right. Okay. So that was about our sample. So okay, yeah. So that was just homeowners in the UK. And one other point to make, actually, the way our panel is structured, these are homeowners of houses. So at this point in time, we need people who live in flats, or for various reasons we don't have to go into. Feedback we have is relatively specific of people who own houses, and like I said, not flats. So glad we were able to answer your question there, Federico. I'll meet you again, but if there's anything else that comes to your mind, feel free to raise your hand again, and we'll bring you back in.
Fantastic. Well, having a look at the list of questions, just in the meantime, there's been one around data and the amount of information that we need to put into these kind of sites for them to be able to understand and produce a quote. Stephen, is that something that you're familiar with and can sort of shed any light? Is it just around the heating system, or are there other pieces of information that are currently being incorporated into these offers?
Well, based on my experience, I think predominantly it's with regards to the existing heating system, the setup of the house, obviously where the boiler is located, how it's fluid. Some of the suppliers ask if you would like to move the position. Like I said, I think I went through Box and that was about 15 questions. I'm pretty sure Thermondo is about the same as well. That's enough questions to direct their algorithm to. And of course, some other suppliers ask you less questions up front, maybe 10 or less, to get a feel for it, and then you can have that personal consultation with a heating engineer or a salesperson to bottom out the rest of the requirements.
I think the key thing there for the service provider to understand is, are they quoting a particular cost and then they have to keep to that, or is there a range that they're quoting? So it's a key risk element, risk and kind of return that needs to be understood around the unit itself, the install process. Are there other internal works that are required? So clearly a like-for-like transition, if we're going boiler to boiler, that's much more straightforward to quote for and keep to. But if we're talking about moving towards a lower carbon or a different heating system, then that is complicating the process. And so that's clearly one of the key challenges for delivering this kind of business model.
That's right, and you raise an interesting point there, Jenny. When it's not a like-for-like swap, how do the platforms deal with that? And at the same time, what impact do these kind of models have for suppliers of ancillary heating system equipment, for example, thermal stores, anything else that you would need with your system controls? I suppose less so impacted. So I think actually I'm going to pick on somebody. Andrew, I see you're with us, which is great. And your hand raised, good timing. So I'm going to come to you, Andrew, and maybe if you just want to give everyone online just a brief overview of your company, what you do in the market, and your thoughts on how this development can impact your company and what you offer. So we should be able to hear from you.
You're muted at your end, Andrew, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So Andrew, I think if you are just able to see a little microphone icon next to your name, if you click that, it should go green, and then we should be able to have you come on. Oh, right. Let's click.
Okay, excellent. I think you can hear me now.
We can. Great.
Hi. Thanks very much. So Sunamp very briefly produces a very advanced heat storage technology called heat battery. It is extremely compact, and by virtue of being compact, order of magnitude 3 to 4 times more energy density than using hot water cylinders. That compactness allows us to enable new business models around, for example, the use of heat pumps with time shifting, so that the heat pump can run off very low cost electricity. The question we have is really, with what is effectively a big shift in system from what went before, is it really feasible to use this kind of disintermediated online selling? I suppose the analogy that we have is, you know, when the iPod came along, or perhaps when the iPhone came along, you know, people understood already what a Walkman or a phone was, and Apple did an incredibly good job of educating people as to what these new category devices were. And a lot of what they did was online, but it wasn't 100% online. They still use the Apple stores to help with that educational process. Is it feasible to do it 100% through online and then also close the sale that way?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. And actually, at our digital summit, so this balance between how much can you automate versus the human touch piece was one of the topics that we talked about and covered, and kind of had a good discussion around. And so I think, in the interest of time, so summarising where we got to on that was appreciating that yes, the digital route to market is incredibly useful for optimizing certain pieces of that customer experience, but actually you need to understand where can the optimum touch points with regards to human interaction be. So yeah, it's working out how best to balance the two, I think.
Thanks, Jenny. We had a question from somebody around how disruptive these kind of business models actually are for installers. And to comment on that, there's perhaps slightly more negative than positive in the way that I see, but the positive is perhaps that through partnerships and agreements with online platforms, they have a greater route to scale than they might have had through their own individual sales efforts. But they do, however, by not having at any point any ownership of the heating system itself, they do lose that margin that they might have gained on selling the heating system and transferring the ownership to the customer directly. In the traditional role, in a lot of countries, the installer has a lot of recommendation power and influencing power over the end customer. And by making the end customer make the decision themselves, there could be some diminishing of that kind of influencing power that the installer has, as well as the financial impact. So again, potentially some positives in terms of the amount of scale of installations that they can do, but some negatives in terms of installer empowerment and margins.
Yeah. I'm glad we got a question on that, because it's something we hadn't touched on a lot so far, the role of the installer, and we did highlight that they were one of the parties who would have to adapt their model the most, could potentially be one of the biggest barriers to overcome for a much wider rollout of these kind of models. We have, I completely agree with Felicity, the initial reactions we've seen are more so on the negative sides. Like you said, there's the value of maintaining the relationship with the customer there, and we've seen examples across Europe over the last few years with some big heating brands trying to, for lack of a better phrase, step on the installer toes a little bit, take a bit more of the end customer relationship, and that's not always worked out as intended. Some of the feedback we've seen from installers is also, every job is a different job. A little bit of work to do to win over installers, in the sense that they know when they turn up to a job, it's been specified correctly, the right parts have been ordered. I think there's a certain level of pride in the job there, as well. On the flip side, we have seen other installers who are very positive about this model, whether that's because they are pretty happy, just kind of turning up, doing a job, move on to the next one, completely understandable. And those a bit more pragmatic who sense, well, maybe it's quite a change for me actually over the next few years. I'm not so enthusiastic about it, but this is the way the industry's moving, so I might as well engage now. And instead of being a laggard. So an
interesting development on that point as well. And so we're talking about online sales platforms for heating systems. Well, we're actually also seeing the development of online sales platforms for tradespeople themselves and home experts with regards to installing or repairing or providing that annual maintenance. And so examples like Local Heroes, the British Gas Initiative, or HomeServe, also kind of making moves to invest in different online platforms for hiring tradespeople. So it's definitely an evolving, changing piece, and specific companies are or a growing number of companies are realizing the importance of kind of engaging all these parts of the value chain.
Yeah, I mean, we would certainly be interested to hear some more opinions from players within the value chain. But maybe you're a controls manufacturer, maybe you're an energy supplier, maybe you like Sunamp manufacture components that go along with the heating system. If you're brave enough, please raise your hand, and we'll bring you in. Otherwise, do type in your question, and we'll if it's clear to us that that's the topic that it's on, we'll come to it. And discuss that between ourselves. One, just while I'll give you a moment to think about that, another element I was interested to consider is just one thing that we find a lot in our research is, there must be something that you can do to encourage customers to save themselves the grief of upgrading, replacing their old aging heating system before it's broken beyond repair. We find in our research, just talking about the UK here with our customer panel, that while it's not quite a 90-10 split in the sense that 90% of the market only upgrade the boiler when it's broken, it's a bit more spread than that, but it's certainly weighted still towards people who only replace when they have to. Could platforms such as this, could they be one of the main ways which encourages more preemptive system upgrades? I guess there's benefits there. It generates more business in the industry. It generates, well, I guess from a policy perspective, more carbon savings if older boilers are getting replaced more quickly, and that could be impactful in, well, I guess, all other European markets except the UK, where condensing boilers have been commonplace for a long time. We're only over the last couple of years have condensing boilers been mandated across Europe. Could that just give an additional boost to CO2 savings? If anyone's got any thoughts on that, do come in.
We had one question about the role of online reviews in influencing online buying behaviour, and I think to follow on from what Stephen said, customers really do value online reviews, customer experience stories, as well as word of mouth reviews from their friends and family, and that's something that we're looking at in our research, is how they interact with those reviews, and there is definitely a lot of weight put on them. So combining those kind of reviews with these kind of sites could be a very powerful option.
And just looking at our screen now, another topic we've not covered yet, so I'll touch on it now, is the whole policy aspect of this. So based on the range of business models, I guess mostly you, Jenny, look at when it comes to how the residential heating market is changing, whether that's shifting to, well, heat as a service or renting appliances rather than the customer being the actual owner of them. To me, it seems like this online sales portal approach is actually the most simple and the most easy to get by policymakers, in the sense that you don't really need to worry so much about consumer protection, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The customer is buying the appliance outright. There's no kind of, after that transaction is completed, They're the owner, it can't be taken away from them. Heat as a service, you get into the whole area of if the customer can't pay or doesn't do their payments on time, can the supplier then take the heating system out, and then you get into a minefield. But I think that's a strong benefit that these suppliers have versus their peers who are trying to innovate in different ways, is that from a policy and legislative standpoint, it seems to be on the surface very, very simple and straightforward. I don't know if you would agree or challenge that.
Yeah, certainly that highlights the difficulty with regards to designing more holistic energy as a service, heating as a service, anything as a service propositions, because they incorporate so many more elements. And so from the provider's point of view, very complex to understand the weighting of risk and what they're willing to underwrite and guarantee compared to what they can actually deliver. So yeah, and certainly we're seeing a lot of discussion around these online sales platforms for heating systems being a starting point to understand increasingly more about consumer behaviours and then use that to design these more complex propositions. So as that kind of entry point to this wider relationship that you could increasingly develop with consumers around energy. So yeah.
Cool. So you think there's potentially over the next several years, as these companies become more established, there's a lot of upside potential, a lot of value add to be achieved that, based on just the early nature of this offering, it's not even been attempted to achieve yet.
Yeah, and certainly building on the technical side of things as well, which we haven't mentioned at all, really around remote diagnostics and utilising the data that is being generated by all these different appliances. How can then that can be incorporated back into the propositions to create, for example, much sort of simpler operational piece for the provider, but also, as you said, upselling or creating new products and services.
Great. Well, this is one of the topics that we'll be covering in some detail at our next European Heat Summit, which is scheduled for the middle of June, the 13th and 14th of June there in Berlin. So we'll be there. Still a few spaces available if you'd like to grab one of the last ones. If you're interested in this topic, we'll also be covering new business models in general. We'll have a session on that. We've got a session on the networks and how networks are evolving. And you can see some of the speakers who have already agreed to share their views on the programme there. So do get in touch if you haven't yet got your place for the summit but would like to come. You can also just register yourself directly to the Delta website. You can see the link on the bottom of the page there.
And then just to wrap up, so we have recorded this session. We'll be posting that on our webinar channel. And if you're interested in the slides, then do get in touch and we can see about sending those out as well and sharing them.
That's right. So I think we've just gone over the hour. So we'll close here. Thanks everyone for joining us and for your engagement, especially with the polls. It was really interesting.
Loads of questions as well. We'll be in touch to answer those that we didn't cover today.
Yes, right. We'll do that.
Okay. But for now, hope you have a good rest of your day and join us for the next webinar on the next emerging trend shaping the future of the heating market.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.